I am recording now. Um, but welcome, everyone. My name is Joseph Cho. I am the 4-H Youth Development Specialist at the state office in volunteerism. And uh, we have a wonderful topic today on how to fill out and complete an incident report. And we are joined by Chris Ryan from um, Carroll County, Howard
Our
County.
county.
That's what I meant. Howard County. Join us to go over the step-by-step guide to how to complete a incident report. And then we'll do some practice runs so that you are familiar with the steps and what are some of the components that are required for an incident report. So I will hand it over to Chris.
Good evening. Hey, Joseph, are you going to control the slides?
Yes, next
Okay,
slide.
perfect. Yeah. So this is our Justice for All compliance information that we share with every beginning of every session that educational opportunity that we offer with the University of Maryland. So tonight, what we want to focus on is really the basic information on how and the purposes that we fill out an incident accident report form. So the documenting an incident in a 4-H program and an event, it's to ensure that we are capturing the most accurate and consistent reporting of any type of incident that might happen during 4-H programming. And that supports safety and accountability. And then, of course, we want to make sure that everything is appropriate as far as that. So when we think about an incident accident report, we want to reflect on when do we need to complete it? So it's pretty basic. When any type of injury or illness happens, it needs to be documented within the 4-H program, whether it's a program, workshop, event. It could be fairs, it could be camp, etc. Any type of injury or illness needs to be documented. Any behavioral incidents need to be documented, whether it's with the youth and adults, and vice versa. Any behavioral incidents need to be documented, including volunteers. The other thing would be property damage, depending on where you are during the event. If there was any type of property damage, that incident also needs to be captured and documented so that everybody is aware. And any unusual or concerns situations would be documented. And so best practices when I think about incident accident reports is anytime something has happened, you should make sure that you're documenting that so that we capture everything that has happened, whether it was, volunteer versus volunteer, volunteer versus youth versus youth. Any type of incident that happens, we should document that with that. And so I often share, even with our organizational leaders in our county, when in doubt, complete the form. And that's just best practices. It also helps us remember the incident at the time if we try to document it within 48 hours of it happening. So that's really important that you do that when you start to complete a incident accident report. So basic incident information that we want to capture in our forms, that form that we have, and we'll take a look at the form a little bit later on. But you want to make sure that you're capturing the date and time of the incident. That's very significant. The location that the incident happened. So whether it was at a club meeting, it could have been on the fairgrounds, it could have been at a school. You want to make sure that you're writing as many details as you possibly can regarding the location of that incident. Specific 4-H activity. So for example, if you're capturing an incident that happened at camp, it would be the 4-H camp and the location where you might be camping. If it was at a public speaking contest, you want to make sure that you're capturing the information with what school you might be at, the location of the school. Make sure that you're very specific when you're including that information. You want to indicate if it's occurred at camp, because that's also it involves other people look at the incident accident reports, and Joseph can speak a little bit more to that. Um, Injuries, illnesses, behavior, property damage, and we always put out other. So if there was like a confrontation between two volunteers, you're going to document that. If it was a volunteer, maybe, and a youth, you want to document that as well. If there was a disruption in a club meeting, you want to document that as well. We get those. Those are some of the common incident accident reports we get submitted during a club meeting. So that kind of falls underneath the other category. But again, we're trying to capture that information. So witness information. So it's very important when documenting your information. There's always a space for witness information. So anybody who might have witnessed the incident. So best practices as we train most of our volunteers is that you should never be in a situation without another adult. We even operate as educators. We make sure that there's another person in the room when we're having conversations with individuals, especially with youth. So you typically will probably have a witness that would be able to fill out and help fill out your incident report. Like an additional, it's like an amendment that you would put with your documentation if you have them fill it out. In the witness information, you want to make sure what their 4-H status is, whether they're still with our program, if they're in good standing, the participation roles. So why were they there? What, it could have been at the request of you that you were physically there. And then attach any additional information that any additional witness might have provided to the actual incident that either an organizational leader's filling out or the educators filling out will capture that additional information. So involved parties, you want to make sure that you have their full names, their status, and then also if they're like maybe were dismissal status, if applicable. That means if maybe after the incident was happened, they were released from 4-H. You want to make sure that you're including as much detailed information regarding the witness that has witnessed this event. So incident details needed. So with this, when completing an incident accident report, you want to describe what happens. You want to be objective and factual. You want to include who, what, when, and where. Those are like the kind of questions as I'm filling out a form. That's kind of what I go through to capture that information. And then it's really important that you really avoid from using opinions or making assumptions. So stick to the facts. As you know, in most cases, when we're filling out any type of forms, you want to stick to the facts and try to be very objective to provide as much information to the university so that it can go up like if it gets escalated once it submits to the university. So as much information that we can provide, the better off it makes Joseph's job a little bit easier as it gets escalated up through the university. Response to an incident. So you want to take action. Who handled the situation? There's typically a space for you to say like what action you took so that it's filled out and how it was handled. If first aid was, so if there was an illness or an injury, like if first aid was initiated or any type of intervention, or if you had to call 911, all of those things need to be documented. If you had to call the police, all of those things need to be documented on the incident accident report as well. And then steps to resolve the situation. So again, you're just documenting what actions you actually took in the incident that you witnessed. And then that's why your witnesses statement is really important because they're capturing as well what has happened. Notifications. So typically when you have an incident accident report, notifications, I think really depends on like what's happening. So if it's dealing with a youth, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to the parent or guardian. You want to make sure that you're also having a conversation with the staff that's in charge or whoever's in charge of the event or program that's happening through 4-H. And then, of course, if you need to notify medical, so if you needed to dial 111 or the police, you want to make sure that you're notifying the applicable people depending on the incident that has occurred. And then, of course, when you're notifying them, just making sure you're taking note of the date and time when you're notifying each of these individuals. So, for example, if you're at camp, a child's gotten injured, they're being transported to the hospital, you want to make notes that you've called the parents, what time you called them. You want to make notes when you call the next supervisor that they know, and the time that you did that, just so there's an account or a timeline of when everybody was notified of the incident that had occurred.
Okay. One of the things that I like about 4-H is that we are learning by doing, right? And I especially am more apt to learn if I have some practice runs. Obviously, we don't have an incident that has happened, and we probably won't want to see that for us to practice on. So I created a scenario here. We'll go through it since we have a smaller group. Why don't we go together to see which are some of the information that is required for an incident report? Now, obviously, because it is scripted and you can see the words, it may be a little easier, but let's parse out some of the pieces that would be required for an incident report. So let me read it out loud for you, everyone. The scenario is a robotics room trip. On Wednesday, April 29th, the Prince George's local robotics club met at the State 4-H Center at 3:30 p.m. When the club members were testing their robot projects, 11-year-old Harry Potter was excited to show off his new robot sensory device. Young Harry ran across the room toward the supply cabin to get a different wheel type for his robot. As he was running, he didn't see the laptop power cord that was draped across the walkway between two tables. Harry tripped over the cord and fell forward, scraping his right elbow on the floor and bumping his left hip against the corner of the wood table. Harry cried immediately. You were a club leader in this scenario and was at the front of the room. What would be some information that is necessary for us to fill out a incident report? Feel free to come off mute and chime in.
Well, the date and the time, the location.
The date, time, and the location. How much of those, and I'm assuming you're looking at the first paragraph, how much of that information is needed for the incident report, do you think?
How much of that information is needed? Of the first line or the whole thing?
The first paragraph, because you were talking about the date and the location, so.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything in that first line would be pretty much, yeah, I think that's all critical right there. I mean, I don't know what the form looks like, so I don't know, the boxes, what you have to fill out. I've never really looked the form up before.
What are other components that we may need to include in the incident reports?
Like who got injured and the details of what happened?
Can you point that out for us, Mary?
Yeah, in the second paragraph, so it was 11-year-old Harry Potter, and he ran across the room and tripped over a laptop power cord that was draped across the walkway between two tables.
Okay, very nice. What other information do you think is needed?
What he injured his elbow and his bumped his hip would be I think information that would be needed. What did he do to himself, and where was the location of the leader in the room at the time, and were there I guess another question's asked, were there any other people in the room also that witnessed it?
Good. Yeah, so like you guys said, it's the same scenario. The important information is the date and time and location, right? You want to be as specific as you can so that we understand situation, the time, the date, what happened. During the robot, you mentioned the name, who it is, identifying who was in the incident, and what really happened. He was running, right, towards the front or wherever the supply cabin is, and then he tripped over the laptop power cord that was draped across the walkway between the two tables. And then what happened, right? You want to provide the incident, the what. Harry tripped over the cord and fell forward, and then scraped his right elbow on the floor and bumped his left hip against the corner of the wood table. You want to be, like Chris said, you want to be as specific as you can so that we have the detail and the information about the incidents without us having to be there. And as you mentioned, you as a club leader, where were you when this incident occurred is also important. What other information should have been included in this incident report?
Who witnessed the incident?
Witness is very important, as Chris has mentioned. Correct. What other information you think?
What was the follow-up? Did he go home? Did you call his parents? Did he have to go to the hospital? Did you just have to pick him up and wipe off his tears and help his pride that was broken? I mean, I guess that's other stuff you need to add.
Definitely. So the first aid, what did you do immediately when this occurred is important. And then the response afterwards, the follow-up. Did you call a parent? Did you talk to a supervisor? Was Harry okay? Was he taken to the hospital and whatnot? Is critical. And then those afterwards is also important to understand the aftermath of this incident, right? At least to the best of your knowledge. Very good. I have one more scenario that I want us to go through together. This one's a little longer. The scenario is livestock vault. On Thursday, August 20th, during the State Fair Junior Beef Show Day, Hermione Granger, lead volunteer, and Ron Weasley, assistant volunteer, were helping three 4-H members move their heifers from the grooming chutes to the wash rack at the main aisles of the cattle barn, which was very crowded and loud. The time was 10:15 a.m. As they were walking, a fair attendee's stroller accidentally bumped into the hindquarters of one of the heifers, named Hedwig, that was held by 14-year-old Draco Malfoy. Hedwig spooked, bolted forward, and then stepped back quickly. Hermione Granger, who was walking alongside Malfoy to assist with the crowd, was unable to move out of the way in time. The heifer stepped directly onto Hermione's left foot and pinned it for several seconds before Draco pulled her forward. Hermione let out a shout and collapsed to one knee. She was wearing leather boots, but the weight of the animal caused immediate severe pain. Ron immediately took the lead rope from Draco to secure the animal and move the group out of the main aisles to avoid a pileup. A nearby volunteer brought a chair for Mark. You, volunteer, arrived 2 minutes after the incident had occurred. You called the fair's on-site EMS at 10:30 a.m. and they arrived at 10:30 a.m., stabilizing Mark's foot with a splint and transported him to the local urgent care for an X-ray. I'm going to go back to the first slide, and you let me know what should be included in the incident report.
I guess you start off with the date, the time, the first time at 10:15, the date, the location where, and the two people that were the two volunteers and what they were doing at the time when they were and the 4-H members also that were involved. We'll start off there.
Okay. What else should be included in the incident report, at least looking at it from just this slide?
I don't know, I would probably include just about all the information that's in the second and third paragraph because contains a lot of detail of exactly what happened.
Hmm. I like that. And then the third paragraph.
What exactly happened to when all the chaos kind of stopped? Um, who got stepped on or who got hurt? Looks like Hermione. And then, but you said somebody about Mark. Who's Mark?
I might have misput that.
Was that supposed to be Malfoy?
Malfoy probably, yeah.
Okay, all right. Because I was wondering where Mark came from. All right, Malfoy. Where he his name also and what happened to him after, like I said, when all the chaos stopped, who were the injured people, write all their information down and what happened to them, and then what was the next step taken, calling the EMS, and then also I guess collecting witnesses because you weren't there at the moment of the incident. So were there other people around that saw the incident besides the ones that were in the middle of it? If they want to, I guess, partake in as a person that saw what was going on.
Yeah, and I think what you said is important that you have to identify the parties that were involved in this incident, right? It was the volunteers as well as the youth. Draco was present. You might want to include that he was uninjured, just because if you don't include some of those details, people who are reading it might assume the worst, right? What happened to Draco? Is he okay? And whatnot. So I think that's important. Um, and how would you record the unknown attendee, the one that had the stroller in this instance? Do you think?
I mean, I would get their information from them, their name and I guess, I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to ask for their phone number or any other information from them. I don't know what's allowed. And are you allowed to take pictures of anything to add to the situation? Because this sounds like a pretty dramatic situation where it could get dirty uh, later on if Mark's foot's all messed up. I don't know.
Sure. Chris, do you have insights on that?
And and all of my years, I have not taken pictures, but I tried to document as much as I possibly can. So I would definitely reach to the person that was in the stroller. I would ask for their contact information just to make sure there was no injuries and follow up with just a phone call just to make sure, hey, I'm checking in with you to make sure everything was okay. I think that's perfectly fine, especially in a fair setting. You're open to the public, that you can have that conversation. Just again, we're just making sure that everything is okay. And every situation is a little bit different. I don't know necessarily if I would capture them as a witness, but I would definitely their contact information just to check in with them to make sure that they are okay, later on, so to speak, after that. And then I would definitely get our assistant volunteer and our lead volunteer, if they're able to provide a statement, as far as a witness of the attachment of what they actually, from their perspective and what they saw, had happened, and get them to document it. So I have always in the past always made sure everything was documented based on anything that was witnessed.
One other thing that I think is important is it does mention that it was very crowded and loud. And there is a potential that you may not find the person with the stroller. Um, Chris, do you have any insights on what you would do in that instance?
So if I wasn't able to identify, like say the stroller and the family moved on and I wasn't able to get a hold of them at that point, I would just continue to document that there was a family that with a stroller that kind of the incident happened and document that. But we wouldn't be able to get that, like if we lost them, like you said, it was very crowded. I would still just, again, try to document as best as I possibly could what happened, what I saw, and then encourage the witnesses to do the same.
Yeah. And I'm sure we would have, like, if it was a very crowded and loud and a lot of people are going in and out, there is a possibility that we may not know who that person is, or we may never see that person again. So I think it's good to document what has happened, even if we can't identify the exact person that may have been in the scene.
Yeah. And I would identify, especially if it was like at the fair, and I have had to do this before, I identified it like a fair goer. And this is what happened with it, and just identified them that there was this person that was from the public. But so depending on the situation, I might mark wasn't able to get contact information from them.
Yeah. Um, is there anything else that you think we should add, Chris?
Um, No, I think it's being very factual about what happened and getting your witnesses to capture it, especially in a animal situation, which scenarios have a tendency you have to fill out incident accident reports. At fair, it's very common. It is very rare that we have a fair that we haven't filled out an incident accident report, especially with animals and the public and everything that we're dealing with. My best practices would be is making sure that your witnesses are completing the information, making sure that your incident accident report gets completed in 48 hours is huge. Because you're going to get the most accurate and detailed information of the incident if you're writing it down within 48 hours. That's kind of like the rule of thumb. I think that we try to capture that information. So I can encourage you to do that, and making sure that your witnesses write down from their perspective, right? You have to get their perspective so that everything is pulled together, with the hopes that, again, the child, once they're taken to urgent care, is seen. And then you're going to also document that side of the incident accident report, because you want to making sure that you're capturing that the child was transported to urgent care with x-rays, and then making sure that your educator or your supervisor that was notified together, you guys want to follow up with the youth that was injured. That's a huge piece too, that we try to stay on top of, making sure we're following up to check on the individual that was injured, especially if they were participating, for example, at fair, with this, and making sure that everything is okay.
I think one other thing from an administrative perspective is to include specific details, such as, so in the first scenario or the second scenario in the first slide, it says that it was very crowded and loud during this incident. Maybe coming from an administrative perspective, the best practice going forward is to maybe source it so that the youth are not transporting their animals during a crowded or a loud time, especially if that could occur again in the future. So that I would recommend putting, as Chris said, as much information into the incident report as possible so that we can learn going forward as well.
Yeah, I would say that too, Joseph. That's a good way when we have scenarios like that. It's for us, in the county with our programs, when incident or accidents report, it gives us an opportunity when you read back over the incident report to make decisions, to make some changes so that, again, we're always using risk management first and what's our best practices, to protect the program, protect the participants that are involved in the program as well. So, some important reminders is confidentiality and compliance. So when you're writing down, you want to make sure you're writing everything clearly and complete, and sticking to the facts. You don't want to make any assumptions. You want to be very factual when you're capturing this information in your incident accident report. and then attach any documentation with that. And so sometimes we have just discharge papers, for example, with or follow-ups that come sometimes with when we, for example, when we go to camp, if we take someone to the hospital, we have typically the hospital gives us some discharge papers and paperwork, and I usually make a copy and enclose that with my incident accident report. So I think that's always helpful to attach that documentation that you might are able to get a hold of, depending on the situation and which program you're actually working with that you're completing an incident accident report. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of promptly submitting something within 48 hours. Because that's the most accurate information once it's happened and you document it, that you're going to get a capture of the incident. Information may be shared as needed. I think that's really important too. So as information shared, it's typically submitted to the university. Joseph is typically the first person who reviews it and then makes the decision where it goes from there. And then also we'll reach out to the local programs if he needs additional information. And again, it's all about learning, and it's also, documenting what's happening in the program to keep everybody safe, and that we are all educating ourselves to continue using best practices as possible. And then subject of the Maryland Public Information Act is always important, and then protection of privacy while we're working through this. So just because you fill out an incident accident report as a volunteer doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's going to follow back up with you or give you a status on that. That's so it gets escalated into the university, and then the university manages it from there, and typically manages it with responses as well. Did you want to add anything else, Joseph, with that piece?
Uh, I don't think so. I think you covered most of the things that I was trying to say. Yeah.
Okay. And so this is a copy of the incident accident report. I always keep, in fact, we keep several copies of these. They're typically in my car. They're also on me. They're in any program forms that I have. And we also make copies for our volunteers as well for at our club meetings. This past year, we had a couple incidents that happened at the club meetings. And so this is just, I wanted to show you so you could see what it is. It's boxes so that you're able. And so if you were, like, say your detailed incident is more than what's in there, you're certainly able to write it down on a Word doc or Google file so that you're capturing that information and you can print it and attach it. So that's also why we encourage you, if you need to attach documentation, because it might not all fit in the boxes. As you're working through the form, that's perfectly fine to attach the documentation as long as you're capturing, again, the details, the most accurate information as possible based on the incident that can be attached to the form. And then as you'll see, it works through it. Typically, you have to list your witnesses. Your response is usually captured as well. And again, if your response is longer than what that box space gives you, you certainly can attach a Google Doc as far as how your response was with the incident and how you managed it and handled it. And then notifications is who you notified once the incident had occurred. So you want to make sure you list that out. And then the times, you'll notice it's asking for the contact and the time. That's why we say making notes of dates and times is really important when an incident has happened. And then there's also a section for if it's illnesses, and like as far as transportation, that you check off the boxes as you're completing that. And then detailed response with that. And then you want to sign off as the reporter, whether you're an organizational leader, a volunteer, you want to make sure that that information gets signed off. And I typically ask the witnesses of an incident to also sign their documentation as well, just stating that that's their statement, how they saw it, and it will get attached with the incident accident report as well.
If you have supplementary or complementary documentation that you want to attach to the incident report, you can also do that. Those may be like emails or photos or whatnot, just to give a clear understanding of the situation when the incident occurred. And one other thing is there is a digital format of this. So if you would rather use a digital documentation rather than a physical, there's a digital copy that you can get from anyone really from 4-H.
Yeah. And Karen, I think you had asked about pictures. I think anytime there's any type of property damage that we're filling out an incident accident, I think pictures would be a great thing to add on to an incident accident report. If there was some damage to property, or if there's somebody liable, like at a facility or something, and say they broke the water fountain, for example, take some pictures of it. I think that will also support anything as it would escalate through the university. I think that's perfectly fine. Okay, and I think this is like our last. So the last thing is like suspected child abuse or neglect. So as University of Maryland employees, volunteers, and I even talked to my teen staff as well at camp about this. We're mandated reporters, so we're required if anything is divulged to us that we report it. And so the process of doing this is you report it to your local law enforcement or your child protective services. And again, it's the rule of thumb, immediately or within 48 hours that you do that. And then with that, you'll have your incident accident report, and you're going to make sure that you document the names and the title of the person who's calling. So if you're the person reporting it to Child Protective Services, they have a whole list of questions that they ask you when you call into them. And it can be quite detailed, and sometimes they want forms filled out as well. It changes every so often. So the last time that I had to do this, I had to fill out a written form as well as do an interview with Child Protective Services. And so they ask a lot of like details, very specific to the incident that happened. So it's really hard for me to give you examples. Just be prepared to answer any questions. And that's why we really stress it's important in this type of situation or incident that has occurred, that you've documented everything that has been said or witnessed, so that you're able to answer to Child Protective Services when they start their questions. Once this is done, once you have called Child Protective Services, I kind of do it together. So once I make one phone call, I call the state office so that they're aware that we have called Child Protective Services on an incident or something has been divulged. And then complete the incident accident report so that the university gets that information as soon as possible as well. I will be honest with you, how I do it is if an incident comes up about child abuse or neglect, I go ahead and fill out the incident accident report based on what was disclosed. And then I call Child Protective Services. And then as soon as I get done with Child Protective Services, I call the university to let them know that I've called Child Protective Services. And then I'm able to submit, like Joseph said, the incident accident report can be done electronically, or it can be hard copy. Either way, you can scan it and send it in so that the university has a copy of that. And they typically want that very quickly, usually within 24 hours once you've notified the university for you to complete that. And then the state office forwards it on to the campus police from there. That's kind of like the next steps once that's happened with that piece. Anything else you want to include with that, Joseph?
I don't think so. I mean, we as employees have trainings around suspected child abuse or neglect. We take this very seriously. If you suspect something, the rule of thumb is say something. So if you do see something that you are unsure about, just, go ahead and take those next steps.
I have a question. I saw on your slide here that it says we're supposed to immediately notify the state 4-H office. Should we notify our county 4-H educator as well? Or are they the ones that submit it to the state office? Or
So whoever is in charge, I'm sure will be notified first. So if this is during a camp, obviously they will be the ones that will take those information and then send it over to the state office. If that is not the case, I would say simultaneously, one after the other, contact the state office and then the county office.
Yeah, I would say, like, for example, if it gets disclosed like in a club setting, as a volunteer, you're completing the incident accident report, you've called Child Protective Services. I would call your 4-H educator, and then also call your 4-H educator will probably give you guidance. It's okay. I will call the state office, or they might say, do you have time to call the state office to share the information that you just shared with me? Because again, you're also being super sensitive about privacy and those types of things. And so that you would let the 4-H office know as well. So typically it is, but if there's a person with you, say if it was an event that happened and it was disclosed, for example, camp has a tendency to sometimes have these incidents happen, and it gets reported. I would just let the educator know who's on site. And then, together you guys probably could work to get the Child Protective Services contacted, the paperwork completed, and then the educator most likely will notify the state 4-H office as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions in regards to this particular slide or anything that we've discussed today with the incident reports? I think we have made it easier for a lot of people to fill it out by parsing it out into sections, so that you know what to write and how to write it. But yeah, Stephanie, did you have a question?
I do. It's a follow-up to Mary's question. It sounds like there isn't always a super clear path about where the first incident report goes and then where it goes after that. I'm just wondering what like accountability mechanisms you have in place for 4-H, like state leaders, like if they haven't actually handled a report that they've received.
Sure. So each incident is handled a little differently depending on the severity of it. There are things, especially if it is an immediate thing, then we would take on a more of a priority with that specific incident. If it needs to be investigated thoroughly in order for us to get the full picture, it may take a little while in order for us to get to that, the full picture of things. So it really does depend on the incident itself, the details that were provided, as well as who was involved, who we can contact. But we do take incidents very seriously, and like what Chris said, there is steps, but as someone who has filed these incident reports, you may not know the full detail of what went into the investigation side of things.
Yeah, I'm sure I don't. I'm thinking of one incident in particular where something happened in June and the 4-H it didn't leave 4-H hands to go to another part of the university until April the following year. That seems pretty delayed. That seems like something that you would want to have like some sort of internal, whether the volunteer knows about it or not, you'd want to have some sort of internal monitoring, like to actually even figure out if a report has stalled. Because it sounds like that could happen without anyone knowing. And that might be because, it goes into a different, like there might be a different entry point each time, depending upon the factors that you all described. Like maybe it goes to a club leader, or maybe it goes to the state first or whatever. And so I think internally it seems like folks might not even know if it stalls. But I would think regardless of the nature of the incident, that having something not move to the next phase for 9 months seems like revisiting.
Sure, we can definitely look into that. If you can provide me with some more details of what that incident was, we can definitely take a look at it to see what has happened. There are different factors that go into certain things. So we would have to look at what those factors were, whether it was negligence from our part or if there was other parts that were being handled in order for us to get to the bottom of everything. But if you can provide me with some more information, I can definitely take a look at it.
I think you might already have it in your inbox from 2 years ago, but I'll re-provide it.
Sure. Any other questions? If not, I will be stopping the recording for our sake.